Assayer of mystic treasures. When he ultimately reached Konya, he put up in a room of the street of the sugar merchants. He put an expensive lock on the door of his rented room and tied the key in the corner of a richly woven turban so that people would consider that he was a wealthy merchant. In fact, he used to live in another room with only a straw mat, a half-broken earthen pot, and a brick for his pillow, and a measure of weeks-old barley husk he used to soak in water and drink as his only means of sustenance. Likewise, it is narrated that one day when that leader of the wise, Shamsuddin Tabrizi, was sitting at the gateway of an inn, he saw that Maulana Rumi, riding on a fleet-footed camel, had emerged from the street of the mirror sellers. Students and men of learning were following the Maulana on foot alongside his camel. Maulana Shamsuddin Tabrizi ran forward and clutched at the bridle of the Maulana's mount and said, "O thou, assayer of mystic treasures, say whether Muhammad the Prophet was greater or Bayazid." Maulana replied at once, "No, no, Muhammad the Messenger of God is much greater, for he is the leader of the prophets and the saints," and quoted the verse, "Fortunate is our country, and to sacrifice ourselves is our duty. The leader of our caravan is Muhammad. The honor of the world is he." But Shamsuddin again asked, "What does it mean that the Prophet Muhammad said, 'Praise be unto thee, vouchsafe thy refulgence'? And Bayazid said, 'Praise be, and my status is great, and I am the king of all kings.'" As soon as Maulana heard this from Maulana Shamsi Tabriz, he came down from his mount, uttered a cry, and descended into unconsciousness. He remained in this state for a whole hour, the populace surging around the unconscious sage. And when he regained consciousness, he replied to Maulana Shams, saying, "Bayazid's thirst was quenched by only one cup, and his capacity was satisfied by one draught, and the narrow chink in the door of his mind could admit only that little radiance of God, whereas the thirst and capacity of the Prophet Muhammad was limitless, and his vehement desire for God's grace was beyond measure, and as the Quran has said, 'Have we not expanded for you your breast?' thereby greatly accommodating, and the extent of God is most extensive. Therefore, the urge and desire of the Prophet was infinitely more great than Bayazid's. Of a truth, the breath of urge of God's love is created by a great thirst." Saying this, Maulana walked back to the seminary with Maulana Shams Tabrizi and went into contemplative retreat in his cloister with him, where they remained in seclusion for 40 days. But some say they remained in a contemplative condition for 3 months. It is further narrated that Maulana said, "When Shamsi Tabriz asked me that question, a sort of window opened in the crown of my head, and a vapor therefrom rose to the skies." The result of that impact from Maulana Shamsi Tabriz and his question was that Maulana stopped delivering lectures at the seminary for a while, nor preached sermons for a time, but gave all his time to deep contemplation over the mysteries of mystic law, and he wrote the verse, "Like the star Utarid, Mercury, the elements of my being were scattered about, though I sat in repose a while, but when I saw the secret writing on the forehead of the cup-bearer, I became intoxicated, and broke the pens in ecstasy." The Tabriz Master disappears. It is further narrated that when this close contact of the two seekers of mystic law passed all limits, those who were the Maulana's earlier followers became jealous and said, "Who is this newcomer to have so much occupied the time and attention of our master for so long?" So Maulana Shams disappeared. For a whole month people looked for him, but he was not to be found and no one knew where he went. Maulana Rumi had thereafter had made for himself an especial type of hat and a robe which opened all the way in front, and that was the way that ancient sages were clad. He further asked that the viol should have 6 strings and should have 6 sides at the base. Previous to that, the instrument had only 4 sides. In regard to making the viol 6-sided, he explained that our viol is 6-sided because each side represents one side of the world, and the strings being straight up are in the form of alif, the first of the Arabic letters, and is the first letter in the name of Allah, and alif is the spirit of the soul. Thus, he added, listen to the alif of Allah through the strings, if you have an inward ear of the soul, and see with the inward eye of the soul the name of Allah in that alif, the straight lines of the strings. At this the lovers swelled to the soulful music and went into vociferous ecstasies. Thus the weak and the strong, the learned, the illiterate, Muslims and non-Muslims, men of all nations and places, converged towards the Maulana's grace and attention and became his devotees, and recited mystical poems and sang songs of mystic meaning. So they acted day and night. But those who were jealous and the dissenters from the mystical law censured these practices and said, "What is this that is going on? A strange manifestation." Men of leisure and wealth, and even some from the ranks of royalty who, because of intense contemplation and occult practices, had left their previous life of luxury, were so affected as to become even demented to the sight of common people. One prince, on account of the excessive devotional exercises and going into mystical trances, had become outwardly mad, and those infidels who had spoken ill of the Prophet became mad in reality. All this was, of course, due to the influence of Maulana Shamsi Tabriz. The Prophet had spoken that no one can attain the truth of faith in his heart about God until men of the world style him mad. And when the reality of the great Maulana became manifest, those who had received the grace of God became his disciples, and those who had erred were left as abandoned ones. Nothing else is for the godless one but adversity, and it is said, "Do not disbelieve the virtuous ones, and fear the fearless God-loving ones, because otherwise the patience of such persons will, of a surety, destroy you." The 6 apparitions and the flowers. It is narrated likewise that the wife of Maulana, known as Kira Khatun, who in piety and rectitude was like the mother of Jesus, reported that one wintry day I saw Maulana resting his head on the knee of Shamsi Tabrizi in repose. This I saw through the chink of the door of his cloister, and then I saw that one side of the wall of the room was opened, and 6 forms of fearful visage entered through the opening and salutated Maulana and placed a bunch of flowers before him. These persons were there until late in the afternoon, and not a word was spoken. Noticing the hour of prayer, Maulana made a sign to Shams to pray and to lead the prayer. He, however, said that in the presence of a superior personality he could not do so. Maulana thereupon led the prayer, after which those 6 persons left the presence after paying high honor. Kira Khatun further stated that, witnessing these occurrences, she became unconscious with fear and bewilderment. "When I came to," she continued, "I found Maulana had emerged from the room and gave the bunch of flowers to me, saying that I was to keep them with care. I sent a few petals of those flowers to the herbalists to examine. They said that they had never seen such flowers in their lives, and asked where they came from and what was their name. Furthermore, all the herbalists were amazed by the scent, the colour, and the delicate texture of those flowers, and as to how it was possible to have such blooms in the depths of winter. Amongst such herbalists was one important master botanist who often went to India for trade and used to bring articles of great curiosity and wonderment from that country. He said that the flowers were from India and that they grew nowhere but in that country, towards the southern tip of that country near Sarandib, Ceylon, now Sri Lanka. And how had they reached room in such freshness and beauty? And he greatly desired to know how they came into that country at that time. Kira Khatun thereupon was all wonderment. Suddenly Maulana appeared on the scene and said, "Keep these flowers with great care, and do not reveal their secret to anyone, for those spiritual leaders who tend the parts of paradise around India have brought the flowers as a gift to you, so that these flowers may impart inner life to you, and add honor to your chastity and piety. Praise be to God, be ever watchful towards these flowers, so that no harm should reach that which is like unto your own eyes." It is stated that Kira Khatun kept the leaves and petals with the utmost care, except that, with the permission of the Maulana, she had given a few leaves to Kaki Khatun, the wife of the Sultan. The virtue of those was that whosoever had a painful eye and rubbed the petals on it was instantly cured. Never did the colour and perfume of those flowers fade, due to the spiritual attainments of the illustrious friends who brought them. The Spirits and the Lights. It is also narrated that they had erected a tall pedestal in the house to place a light thereupon, and Maulana always stood there reading the mystical writings of the saintly Bahuddin from the early part of the night until dawn. One night, however, a group of jinyan, genies or spirits, who lived in the house, complained to Kira Khatun that they could no longer stand the light the whole night, and feared that the occupants of the house might be harmed by them. This was duly reported to the Maulana by his wife, who did not then say anything. On the third day he informed Kira Khatun that she need fear no longer, since all those who complained to him had become his disciples, and none of his relatives or friends would be harmed in any way. The Secret Ride to Battle. It is narrated also that there was a master butcher, one known as the celebrated Jalaluddin, who was one of the oldest disciples of Maulana. He, too, was a man of great gifts of high humour and affection. One of his diversions was to buy colts, and after training them, to sell them to high personages. His stable was always full of excellent horses. It is narrated that once from the unknown vistas news was flashed to the mind of Maulana that a great catastrophe was about to come to the world. For nearly 40-odd days, he said, Maulana used to roam about in an uneasy frame of mind, his large turban tied to his waist. At last, continued the master butcher, one day I saw Maulana enter my house in a very preoccupied condition, and I made obeisance, whereupon he commanded that I should saddle a very fleet-footed horse for him. 3 of us, with much difficulty saddling the resisting mount, offered the horse to Maulana, who, jumping into the saddle, rode fast towards the land of Qibla, southward. I asked whether I, too, might accompany him, to which he replied that I must help him with my moral help. Late in the evening I saw that he had returned, his clothes all covered with dust, and that the horse, which had a mighty frame like that of an elephant, was so greatly tired out that he was weak to an unimaginable degree. The next day, continued the horse dealer, Maulana asked for another horse, better than the one which he had used the previous day, and, as on the day before, he rode away in great haste and returned at dusk. The horse was quite exhausted, and I did not dare to ask the reason. On the third day likewise, the Maulana came and asked for a horse, and as before rode fast and furiously away. When, however, he returned at the time of the prayer of the evening, he sat down in repose and greatly satisfied, and sang, "Congratulations, congratulations, O ye friends of mine who sing, for that dog of hell was sent back to hell." And I, fearing Maulana greatly, could not ask the reason for all that. After a few days, when a caravan arrived from Syria, we heard that a horde of Mongols had greatly distressed the city of Damascus, and they said that it was Halaku, or Hulagu Khan, who had taken Baghdad by the sword in 1257 and had killed the Caliph, then took Aleppo and converged towards Damascus, and that Munko Kar rode up to Damascus, and when their troops had surrounded it, the people of Damascus saw that the Maulana had arrived to help the troops of Islam, with the result that they completely overwhelmed the Mongols. The one who gave these tidings cheered us greatly, and with gladness in our hearts we came to Maulana for him to comment on what had happened at the siege of Damascus. And said the Maulana, "Aye, Jalaluddin, it is so." The Rich Merchant and the Dervish of the West. It is also narrated that important companions had reported that at one time a rich merchant from Tabriz arrived at Konya, and having put up at the house of a sugar merchant, asked as to what celebrated divines resided in that city, so that he might go to salute them, and kissing their hands gain virtue by their grace. For it is said that when one might go on a journey, at one's destination one should seek the company of a man of virtue. They replied that in their city there were many men of piety and godliness, but the most notable amongst them was the leader of the learned ones, by the name of Sheikh Sadruddin, who had but few to equal him in religious matters and in the law of the mystics. Some men of learning took him to the house of Sheikh Sadruddin and took some 20 dinars worth of presents to the sheikh. When the Tabriz merchant reached the house of the sheikh, he saw a crowd of functionaries and servants around attending to the wants of the sheikh. Seeing this, the devout merchant was much grieved, and said to himself that he had come to see a dervish, who has no need of such retainers and superficial show, and not an overlord. Those who had brought him there stated that that kind of display did not affect the sheikh, for he had a heart of mystical attainment. Rich sweets do not harm a medical man, but are harmful to an ill one. The merchant, however, entered the presence of the great sheikh with considerable distaste, and said that despite his donating large sums in charity and giving generously to the needy, he was always in financial difficulties, and asked its reason and remedy. But the sheikh paid little heed to his question and application, whereupon the merchant returned with a saddened heart from the presence of the sheikh. On the second day, he asked if there was no other great divine from whose contact I could profit morally and spiritually. And thus he was told that there was one other man of piety and virtue, and he was Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, whose ancestors had been men of learning and piety for 15 generations, and day and night he devotes his time to prayer and meditation and a sea of matters of mysticism. Upon his showing a keen desire to approach such a one, his friends guided him to the house of Maulana and towards his seminary. They tied 50 dinars in the end of his turban, and when they arrived at the residence of Maulana, they saw him immersed in close study. With the influence surrounding Maulana, the newcomers became dazed and affected, and the Tabriz merchant, as soon as he set his eyes upon Maulana, was enormously influenced and began to weep. Maulana said, "Your 50 dinars are accepted, but those 20 which were offered to the sheikh the previous day are wasted. God's wrath was about to descend upon you, but in his grace he guided you to this seminary, and from this day onwards be of good cheer. No ill luck will attend to your business." The merchant was greatly impressed by this message, for he had not spoken his heart's desire yet. Maulana further said, "The reason for your misfortunes was that one day you were walking in a street in the region of the Western Franks, and there you saw a great Frank, or European, dervish, sleeping at the crossroads. Disliking his poverty-stricken frame and the place where he slept, you stepped over him as if disgusted by his misery. The heart of that saintly person was thereby hurt. The cause of your continued misfortune, therefore, has been that attitude of hauteur and undue pride. Go and seek his forgiveness and make him happy, and give my greetings to him." The merchant was greatly affected by this pre-knowledge. Maulana asked the merchant whether he would like to see the Frank dervish at that very hour, and saying that, he, Maulana, touched the wall of his cloister and thereby revealed a door, asking the merchant to look. And the merchant saw through that door the very crossroads as described by Maulana, and saw the dervish sleeping as before. The merchant in amazement tore his clothes like a madman and rode to the spot indicated by Maulana. When he arrived at the city in the western part of Frankistan, the land of the Franks, he sought the spot at the crossroads and saw the Frank dervish asleep there as before. The merchant alighted from his mount at a fair distance in respect and solicitude, and made obeisance toward the Frank dervish. Seeing the merchant, the dervish said, "I am powerless, otherwise I would have revealed to you, as also the power of God, had Maulana permitted me to reveal myself thus, but come near." Saying this, the dervish embraced the merchant with affection and kissed his beard, and added further, "Now see my master Maulana." And the merchant saw Maulana himself engaged in mystical audition, and uttering mysteries of mysticism and singing the verse, "The ownership is his. Whatever you have, be happy. Be carnelian, or become a ruby, or only remain a clod of earth. If fidelity thou seekest, or infidelity thou desire, be that as it may. Tell thou to him, attach thyself to truth, be thou a Frank." Later, when the merchant betook himself to the presence of Maulana, and conveyed the salutations of that Frank dervish to Maulana, he, the merchant, gave as gifts many presents to the disciples of Maulana. Residing thereafter at Konya, he became one of the devoted disciples of Maulana.